Mr. Quenton Jordan, Vice President of the Black Conservative Federation. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well. We are, gosh, just under a month out from Election Day. Talk to me a little bit about how you're feeling in this moment. Any stress, any concern?
No stress. I'm feeling excited. We've been on the ground across the country since February. We kicked off in South Carolina, and then we've just been touring different swing states, especially these last couple months. So we've been hitting Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, different places like that. So I'm excited. The energy is pretty high on both sides, which is a good sign. Would love a pretty competitive presidential race. So it brings out the best in both candidates.
It definitely is going to be a very close race if we believe all of the polls that we're seeing. One thing that is super clear this election is how much both candidates want to win over Black voters and
Yeah.
Black men, especially this election cycle. So I want to take a moment just to explain to our listeners why Black voters and especially Black men are such a critical voting bloc.
Yes, so I would say that this is really the first election where both parties have had to fight for the Black vote. In previous elections, the Black vote pretty much always went to the Democratic Party in large numbers. We're talking upwards of 90%. Now you have a Republican candidate in Donald Trump who's talking to the issues of the Black community, specifically Black men, Black fathers, and Black parents in general. So we don't want to leave out the mothers there. But his message is resonating because he's talking about issues that families talk about at the dinner table, that men talk about in the barbershops, and quite frankly, is resonating with people. Everyone is seeing the impacts of inflation on everything from the price of gas, groceries, and even if you're going out to eat and hang out with your friends. We're seeing the migrant crisis impact communities that don't even come near the border, but it's right at their front doors. And so Donald Trump has been the candidate who said, hey, I don't want to ignore you all. I'm going to make an effort to fight for your vote. And that's caused the Democrat Party to what I consider panic, but it's also caused them to really, really make a targeted effort for Black voters.
Yeah, and I want to take a moment, especially looking at what you're hearing as the top issues for Black men, especially going into November.
Yeah, so I would say the top three issues that I'm hearing, regardless of where I go across the country, are number one, inflation. I think that has impacted every American, but specifically Black Americans, especially when you think about where we fit into the financial picture of America. So it's causing a real burden on families. The second issue that I'm hearing is surprisingly the migrant crisis. Not so much that we're against having migrants come into America, but it's more so, hey, we're seeing migrants come into America, often cases illegally, and they're getting resources that the Black community has been fighting for, in some cases begging for decades. And that's not sitting well with people, especially in cities like Chicago and places like New York, where the government is spending billions of dollars on the migrant crisis. They're opening up schools that were previously closed down in order to shelter the migrants. And, Black voters are saying, hey, something is off here. And I would say that the third thing is crime. I know that there's been a lot of talk on whether or not crime has come down nationally, but if you go into these communities, people don't feel that, right? We're talking a difference of we had 21,000 murders last year, and now we're at 20,000, right? It's still an extremely high number, and people feel that every day. And you have a spike in different crimes, such as car thefts, which has been trending for the last couple of years, and it's at record highs. And so those are the top three issues that I'm hearing. And I think, again, Donald Trump has been the candidate who's been more vocal on providing a solution for those. And the Democratic Party just doesn't seem to have an answer.
And I know the Democratic Party, frankly, since 2008, with the first election of Barack Obama, has actually steadily been losing Black male voters. His numbers in 2012 were slightly lower than what he had in 2008. And then by 2016, Hillary Clinton had significantly less, 2020, Biden had less, and now here we are, 2024, we've had a ticket change on the Democratic side. Does that change the way Black voters feel about the Democratic Party? Because I remember when the change was first happening, there were concerns around whether or not that meant that voters would see the Democratic Party as unstable. Like, y'all can't even have a candidate. You got to figure out what it is.
Yeah, and I've been pretty vocal on this. I called it months ago, and I said that Joe Biden wouldn't be the candidate, and it would presumably be Kamala Harris, just because they couldn't have passed up the opportunity to have the first Black president come from the Democratic Party, which I think, quite frankly, was, excuse me, a good decision on their behalf to choose her as the candidate. I do think it came a little bit late in the game where, excuse me, where people have pretty much decided where they line up. And it's not a personality decision that they're making. They're basing this on policy, right? And so I think with Kamala being the pick from the Democratic side, you already have a sense of where she lines up politically from a policy perspective because she's been in office, right? She's also run for president before, so it's not an entirely new candidate that we're seeing go up against Donald Trump, who is probably the most visible and vocal politician that I've at least seen in my lifetime. And so people are making the decision to vote based on policy this election. And I think that's why we're starting to see a major shift in the way that voters are leaning, especially when it comes to Black males, because of those top three issues that I just listed out for you.
Yes, and I want to take more time to delve into Black men, because one thing we heard last week from Barack Obama was that there seems to be this excitement around Kamala Harris, in part because of her identity as a woman, as a Black woman, a woman of color, not forgetting her Asian heritage as well, her South Asian heritage. And he said that excitement or that energy doesn't seem to be there with Black men. And he insinuated, or I would say actually flat out said, it's because Black men can't seem to wrap their mind around having or voting for a woman for president of the United States. Just wanted to pause for a moment and sort of get your response to that analysis that he had, and if that's a fair analysis to make about Black men, that they don't want to support a Black woman.
Yeah, I don't think it's a fair analysis. What I will say about that is it's almost a slap in the face to say that Black voters are or should lean support towards a person for symbolism versus substance, right? Like I said previously, this election is all about policy. Who is going to put forth policies that make the life better for myself, my community, and my family? And again, voters have that decision. It doesn't have to be based on emotion. It doesn't have to be based on identity politics, which we've seen play a major part in previous elections. And I think that voters are waking up and saying, hey, I voted one way due to identity politics or due to symbolism previously, and things have only gotten worse. And now they're starting to take a look at what are both of the candidates offering. And when you put both plans in front of you, people are allowed to make that decision. So I don't agree with Barack Obama's statements. I think he came from a genuine place and trying to rally support for the candidate who he's obviously pushing forward. But I don't think that his approach put Black voters on a high pedestal. It's pretty much saying that, hey, regardless of what you think about the substance of each voters, you're Black. You should know what it feels like to be Black and go vote for a Black candidate. I don't agree with that.
One thing that stood out to me when we look at the polls is this generation gap that we're seeing among Black men, specifically where younger Black male voters find themselves drawn to former President Trump, whereas older Black male voters find themselves drawn to the vice president. Curious for you if there's anything surprising in there, or what could potentially be driving this generational gap. What is the former president saying or doing that is speaking to young Black men that the vice president can't do?
Yeah, I think the largest factor that plays into the generational differences is information, right? Older generations aren't on social media as much as younger generations. So we're able to see both candidates much more, right? So Donald Trump, he's out here doing podcasts left and right. So we're able to hear what his actual stances are, and people are asking him challenging questions. If he's able to support that with things that we agree with, then that's where we lean. Older generations are typically going to be focus more so on the news cycle, which can be swayed one way or the other. And I think that that level of information and how quickly you're getting it or where you're getting it from is going to play a difference, right? And so when you talk about younger male voters, we're typically not watching your major media outlets like a Fox News or a CNN. We're typically going to, log on to Twitter and see, hey, what did this candidate do yesterday? Okay, where can I go and watch this full form podcast? And we're tuning into that more so than the traditional media. And I think that's the biggest difference between the generations. I don't necessarily believe that it's an ideological difference. Again, I think most Black people are raised on conservative principles. We typically do everything in a conservative fashion except vote. But I think that is starting to change with the younger generations, just given the visibility and accessibility of information that's out there.
What do you think, or I guess I should say, when we hear Black men express their concerns, express what it is that they're asking for from candidates, I feel like it's fairly straightforward. There's no hidden message that's being given. But then when election day rolls around, or we start to do those exit polling, we see those numbers, we see Black men don't show up as much as Black women. In the conversations you're having, do you think Black men feel that their vote has power?
I think this is one of the first elections where Black men feel that they could be the deciding factor. I don't think that we've had that traditionally in previous elections. And like I said, it's the first time that both parties are actually making an effort to go after Black voters. And so while we have their ear, we're going to make sure that our voices are amplified. Hey, here's what we want as a voting bloc. We want the best candidate who can support each of these initiatives, right? We want solutions that are going to make lives easier for us and our families. We want policies that are going to alleviate some of the stress that we're feeling in this current economic environment. And we're going to put our vote for the candidate who we feel best suited to do that. And so I think that, we will see an increase in the number of Black men who are getting out to vote now. We have a ton of media coverage from both sides that is, heavily favoring Black males as being the deciding factor in this election. And we have two candidates who, Kamala Harris just put out her plan yesterday, specifically for Black men, after she told us that she wouldn't put out a plan specifically for Black people. So again, I'm excited to see that. I'm excited to see what President Trump is going to put out. I do think that conservative principles that are typically put forth by President Trump and the Republicans are going to be the better solution. But I would never be mad that both candidates actually are fighting on behalf of Black male voters.
Yeah, curious if you had a chance to look at the vice president's policy proposal, and if you had any thoughts on it. I know I actually spoke with Michael Singleton earlier, and he was like, I don't agree with her approach to do it, but it's sort of similar, where it's like you can't be angry at these candidates for wanting to find a way to help and to provide resources for Black Americans, and especially Black men.
Yeah, I think the biggest hindrance that Kamala will have, even after putting out this plan, is that it just doesn't come across as believable. Because again, I referenced her direct statements where she said that she wouldn't put a plan together specifically for Black Americans, but a plan for all Americans. And now we turn around, fast forward 3 weeks before the election, when we're seeing that the polling is not in her favor with Black men, and now we all of a sudden get a plan. And so I think that level of flip-flopping on positions is going to be a hindrance, regardless of how great her plan may be in the eyes of some folks. And again, I think that Donald Trump has already put forth an effort to win Black voters in previous elections, right? And so in 2020, he came forward with the Platinum Plan. I think we'll see some revisions of that talk directly to Black voters yet again. And so it comes across as more genuine, and it's not a response to, well, this NAACP poll said that 25% of Black men don't want you. We're seeing polls from every other news outlet in America saying that, hey, Black men are leaning more towards Donald Trump. And now all of a sudden we get a plan for us. It just doesn't come across as believable. And so I think we'll see that play a factor in the election as well.
We often hear Democrats wanting to point toward these comments, controversial comments that the former president has made. Do you think that that resonates with Black men when you hear, Al Sharpton or Stephen Horsford or Clyburn sitting there saying, oh, well, he said this about the Central Park Five, or he has said this previous. Does that do anything for Black men to say, oh, yeah, well, then I'll turn around and vote for the Democrats?
I think this goes back to that generational difference that we were talking about. I don't think that younger men typically look to, an Al Sharpton as the voice of reason, who I'm going to listen to for my political advice and who I'm going to vote for. Again, we're looking at different outlets. We have different leaders, depending on who you consider a leader for this generation. And a lot of them are leaning more towards Donald Trump. And so that older generation may still view Al Sharpton as this influential voice. I think that there is a generational gap there. And again, I don't want to take anything away from Al. I don't know him personally. And so I think that's where you'll see the difference.
How confident are you that Black men will show up this year? Again, thinking about those numbers that we see where Black women often show up more, but thinking really about how much time and energy and effort we're seeing Trump and Harris try to put into speaking to Black men this year.
I think that Black men are aware of the opportunity that lies before us, right? We're a deciding factor in this election for one of the first times, at least in my lifetime. And I don't think that we'll pass up on that opportunity, because if we get it right, life gets better for both of us, right? If we hold the candidates to the fire and make them actually put out plans that resonate with us, that talk to the issues that we care about. And then once they get elected, if we put them in office and we hold them accountable for the things that they promised us, um, we won't forget that, right? And I think that Donald Trump knows that, which is why he put out the Platinum Plan in 2020. And I think that's why he's going to revise it again. And that's why he's talking to Black community leaders, Black business leaders, and religious leaders all across the country to see what needs to go into that plan. And I think that the Democrats are seeing these polls and saying, hey, we can't leave this group out of the conversation anymore. I think Black men view one as a reactive response from the Democrats. And I think they view it as Trump doesn't have to come up with a plan for Black America, but he's still fighting for our vote on that side of the aisle. And I think when people consider both what goes into one plan versus what goes into the other and what influenced each of those candidates to put a plan forth in the first place, I think that we'll see a lot of that support going towards Donald Trump. But I also do believe that we'll see one of the highest turnouts for Black male voters that, at least again, we've seen in my lifetime.
So I'm very interested. I know BCF has been doing a bus tour a couple of times this year, I think, like different DOTV events, things of that
Yeah.
nature. Talk to me a little bit about the work that you're doing to reach not just Black men, but Black voters this year to say, regardless of who you vote for, get out, like you exercise that right to vote.
Yeah, so most of the work that we do is community based, and it's all about community building. We talk about economic empowerment, educational excellence, and just community engagement, all in effort to build a more prosperous Black community across America. And so we've been doing work, like I mentioned, we started in February by going out to South Carolina, a place that we typically haven't been as an organization. We've also expanded our footprint to more than 20 states across the country. And so we're meeting people where they're at. We're hearing about what issues they care about. We're making sure that we have people in place to go to these school board meetings in some of these failing districts. We have some of our board members who frequently travel to different jails and prisons across the country to understand what needs to change there. And so we're actually doing work that we're preaching about. We're hearing from voters. We're hearing from families impacted by some of the issues that are going to drive voters to the polls this year. And we're making an effort to say, hey, we'll support you. Let us know what we need to do to help you get to the polls. Let us know what we need to do to make sure that your voice is heard from not only the federal level, but all the way down to these local elections. And so I'm excited about the work. I'm excited about the opportunity that we have as a Black community, especially as Black men in this upcoming election. And so looking forward to what happens in November.
So then, Quentin, my final question for you, as we get closer and closer to election day. Somehow it feels like it's like right around the corner, and at the same time it feels like
Yeah,
it's so far away, and it's
yeah.
exhausting, exhilarating, all of the things. But as we're approaching, curious for you, looking at everything that we've discussed today, what is the role of Black men this year? Is it as simple as get out and vote? Is it more than that? Is it stay actively political with your elected leaders? I mean, what do Black men, or what do you hope Black men will do this year and take away from this election?
I think the message is simple. Number one, make your voice heard, right? Whether that's at the polls, I'm encouraging people to make their voices heard well before you get to the polls. Show up to your local city council meetings. Show up at your school board meetings. Show up and just make your voice heard. By the time we get to the polls, if there's not a solution in place for the issues that you put forth, it's maybe a little bit too late. But I think what we've been seeing all across the country are people being more vocal about what they want to change, whether that's issues related to the migrant crisis in some of these cities, whether that's issues related to funding for some of these public schools in the communities, or whether it's related to crime. I think that Black men and the Black community in general has been much more vocal in this election cycle than I've seen in previous election cycles. And that's my message. Continue to make your voice heard, right? Regardless of who your candidate is, we need solutions. And so if we don't know what the issues are, if we don't hear directly from the community, we won't get the solutions that the community needs. And so I think that we'll see tremendous improvement in terms of the response from our federally elected leaders after this election cycle for sure.
And I actually lied to you because as you were talking, I came up with one more question.
Sure.
As again, we're watching this battle over Black men play out in real time. And as you mentioned, we're seeing so many headlines, news coverage around Black men. What are we, or are our candidates, whether that's the presidential candidates or our congressional candidates, it's also a midterm year, which I know
Yeah.
sometimes gets lost when that White House is up for
Yeah.
grabs. What are our candidates, though, getting wrong when it comes to speaking to and connecting with Black men?
I don't know that it's necessarily that the candidates are getting it wrong. I think that what most candidates who I feel have a realistic chance of winning are getting right is that they're showing up where we typically didn't see them do that in previous election cycles, especially from the Republican ticket. We've been to communities all across the country, specifically Philadelphia, Milwaukee, even here in Chicago, where we've had Republican leaders who are up for election coming down and speaking to the community. And that just traditionally has never happened. And I think that that's one thing that they're getting right. I think there's still a lot of work to be done to ensure that not only are you showing up, but we have more Black voices at the table even after you get elected. I think that's still to come. I do believe that that will come. And so I think that there's more work to do. There's obviously areas of opportunity, but I don't think that they're necessarily getting it wrong.
Funny, and kind of makes me think of, those little sayings when you're a kid where it's like, treat others the way you want to be treated. Listen, when people are talking, that's all y'all got to
Yeah.
do. Just listen. And that helps people feel like they're connected or you're connecting with them. So, but it seems very simple, but politics is never simple.
It's never as simple as it looks.
But Mr. Quenton Jordan, thank you so much for taking time to speak with me today and for joining me on the switch up. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate you for having me. Thank you.
Perfect. I'm sure, hopefully we'll be talking again soon before this election. Again, as far away as it seems, it's also very, very close. But
Yeah.
be sure to send along. I'll send you the link for the article as well as the podcast once both are live. I think our article is probably going to come out either, maybe not tonight with Harris speaking with Charlemagne. Probably going to be a lot of coverage around that. We don't want this to get buried. So probably
Yeah.
tomorrow morning, but we'll send
Okay.
it your way once it is live.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You too.